Chapter 5. Well, Karina. Larry Wallace started as he stood up behind his desk. I never imagined that this day would arrive. You have been an excellent officer, for this department, for just over 20 years now. Larry. You're still like one of the family. You've been there for us throughout Malachi's entire life, Ronnie's life. As Karina spoke, her eyes began to water up. Then, mid-sentence, she stood up and reached her arms out to Larry for a hug. I'm gonna miss working for you, Larry. Yeah. I know you will. You've gotta remember though that we are still friends, which means that we will still visit each other. Larry responded and then hugged her. We're gonna miss working with you too, Karina. Especially Kim. He's been your partner for the majority of those 20 years. Now look. You've got Nicole working with us. And rather if Nicole knows it or not, she too is an excellent worker, and that's thanks to you, Karina. She followed in your footsteps. Thank you, Larry. And I know that Nicole would thank you also, Karina said as she pulled away from him. To avoid a large urge to cry, she then turned to face the door. I'll call to invite you over for dinner with us sometime. You take care of yourself. I will, Larry. Thank you. With that, Karina quickly rushed out of the office and then up a flight of steps to the parking lot. As Karina got into her car, she began to cry just about as fast as the heat wave came pouring out of the vehicle. It was just over 100 degrees out, and with the dark color of maroon paint on the car, she knew that the temperature, inside of the car with its windows closed, could have been close to 150. Deciding that a talk with David might make her feel better, she made a short drive, of about 70 feet to the city hall. As she pulled up in front of the building, however, it struck her to be odd that his truck wasn't there. Shortly after Sterling had moved into the house, 3 years earlier, Sterling had signed the title to his truck, a cherry red Ford Explorer, over to David, who was more capable of making the payments. Though she had slowed down, in front of the city hall, without seeing the truck, Karina decided to just head home. Where could he be? She asked herself as she turned onto Finley Lane. Then, as she reached the top of Finley Lane, her question was answered as she found the truck at home. Along with Kim Nay's car. As she pulled in, behind David's truck, she suddenly realized that Larry was pulling in right behind her with a patrol car. What's going on, Larry? She asked as she climbed out of the car. Well. You don't think that I was gonna let you slip away that easily, do ya? Larry said with a big grin on his face. Then, as he put his arm over her shoulder, he continued. Let's go on in and see what's happening. Just as they reached the cement steps, to the front door, Karina noticed that cars, belonging to other officers, dispatchers, and other family members, were parked along the curb of 9th Street. Why didn't I notice all of those cars there when I pulled around to get into my driveway? Karina asked, not expecting an answer. Opening the door, she was immediately greeted by Malachi. Congratulations, Mom, he said loudly. Surprise. At least 20 people yelled from upstairs. In front of everyone else, upstairs, was David and Kim as they smiled back at her. You see, Karina. Larry said as he held one arm over Karina's shoulder and then his other arm over Malachi's, you're never gonna get rid of us. Work or no work. Oh, I love you guys so much. Karina said as she wiped a tear off of her face with her hand. Come on up, honey, David said. We have bratwursts, hot dogs, and hamburgers frying out back. Your mom is setting some potato salad, along with other things, out on the table. My dad is spiking the Kool-Aid, and the rest of us are just waiting on you. Just as David finished, Karina had reached the top step with Larry and Malachi right on her heels. Well, give me a kiss, you big hunk, and then tell your dad to give me a big glass full real quick, Karina said as she wrapped her arms around her husband. I love you, David. I love you too, honey. Along other police department employees being there were also City Hall employees, Patty and Bill, Mr. and Mrs. Bruce, Mr. and Mrs. Alberts, Mrs. Sanchez, Nicole's parents, along with at least a dozen of other people that Karina had only recognized. At about 11 o'clock that night, The celebration had come to an end after someone had called 555-8091 to request an officer over a domestic dispute. "Mom." "Yeah, Ronnie?" Someone is yelling in the phone. Pausing, as he pulled the phone away from his ear and covered the receiver with his hand, "They're saying that they need an officer at the come-and-go by the middle school. Something about a fight." "Ah. Larry," Karina said quietly, as now Ronnie's words had muted the entire household, "how did they get our number?" "Good question. Here, Ronnie, let me talk to them, bud," Larry said, and then began to talk to an extremely frantic woman on the other end. As October rolled around, Karina had been just getting used to being in retirement about as much as Nicole had gotten used to spending, at least an hour a day, practicing her signature as Nicole Declue, rather than Nicole Malboff. "Day after tomorrow is our big day, Nicole," Malachi said as he came up from behind Nicole, then wrapped his arms around her. "You must have filled out an entire notebook by now with your signature." Tilting his head forward, Malachi kissed Nicole on the top of her head as she continued to write. "Yeah, but I might as well get used to writing it for several years to come," Nicole responded as she set the pen down, then turned in the chair to face him. "I love you so much, Malachi. I just can't believe that we're only 2 days away from husband and wife." "Me neither. I tossed and turned all morning today." "I know you did. When I got home from work at 1 o'clock, as usual, it seemed that you were still partially awake." "I was. But then I easily fell asleep after you laid down with me," Malachi explained as he pulled out a chair next to her. "You know. What's weird though is that I don't think my lack of sleep is due to our wedding." "What else could it be though?" "Well, I don't know how much my mom has explained it to you, but I do know that you have heard more than once, from either my mom, my grandmother, or just Ronnie, Eddie, and I talking about it, but a male vampire is born into this world with his #1 mission in life being to protect his mother." "Yeah. I've heard that a few different times." "Well, anyway, it was either my mom, or my grandmother that had once told me that when a male vampire had found a mate that person becomes that male's #2 mission in life. Today wasn't the first time that I've had trouble sleeping. This started the same day that I had infected you. Right after my interview with CNN. So, does that mean that the #2 mission begins at time of infection rather than actual marriage?" Nicole asked with a look of question in her face. "Well, that's the way that it seems. As I said, once you're in bed with me, I can easily fall asleep. When I can see that you're safe." Pausing, Malachi turned himself sideways in his seat as he reached out towards Nicole's hands and held them in his own. "I want you to know, honey, that when our child has been conceived and then born, that I will love him regardless of any differences within him. I know that Lloyd's, Jamie's, and Sterling's words must have been haunting you as much as they have been haunting me. But I promise that I'll see this child as being no different than any other child. And, as you know, you will be his #1 mission in life." "Honey." "Yes, Lloyd's, Jamie's, and Sterling's words about our one male child, that will be different from other children, other than being a vampire, and will require us accepting these differences, when he tells us about it when he's 17. Has been on my mind a lot. Somehow though, I think that you're more worried about it than I am. You see, honey, the way that I look at it, is that as long as he is healthy that is all that really matters. This child is gonna be ours, which means that he is gonna be perfect no matter what." But nothing in this world could be quite as perfect as you are, Nicole," Malachi said as he stood back up and then hugged her. "Well, I'm happy that you think so. Now, what do you think about this one?" Nicole asked as she pointed at a signature, of which he could only recognize the N and the D within the scribble. "Well, if you're a doctor it's perfect." Then, as he looked at the top of the page, he saw the word Lucifer clearly printed. "What's this?" "Coincidentally, I was thinking about our future child. I thought that that would be a unique name." "Sounds different. What does it mean?" "According to Collier's dictionary, here on page 803. Pulling out the old dictionary and opening it, Nicole pointed towards the bottom of the page. "It says 1. The planet Venus when it is the morning star. 2. In Christian theology, Satan as leader of the fallen angels, he was an angel of light until he revolted against God and, with others, was cast into hell." "Well, Number 1 sounds good. And I do think that the name is unique. If you would like Nicole, I think that we can stick with that name for him. I'll leave that up to you for the final decision. We'll see. Since that name came to mind, I've been stuck with it. We have a while before the decision has to be finalized. The following 2 days seemed like eternity as both Nicole and Malachi prepared for their wedding. It was decided that their wedding would take place at the church, kitty corner from their own home, just as David and Karina had 20 years prior. As planned, and rehearsed several times over and over, Ronnie was the ring bearer. Eddie was the best man, and then Larry Wallace would give Nicole away. "Where is Mom and Dad, Ronnie?" Malachi asked, just moments before the wedding was to start. "I don't know. About a half hour ago they said that they would be right back, and then took off with Grandma Sanchez. They said not to worry, and that they would be back on time." Ronnie was wearing a tuxedo and had just got his dark brown hair trimmed. As he stood at about 5'8" and about 130 pounds, his general appearance was extremely professional. The darkness of his hair, combined with blue eyes, of which was odd for his Hispanic origin, made him seem very appealing to most girls. The only detail of his appearance that had ever drawn any question was his extended teeth. "Well, we still have another 20 minutes or so," Malachi said as he looked at his watch. "Hopefully they'll be here on time. Do me a favor and let me know as soon as they get here." Like Ronnie, Malachi also wore a tuxedo and had also recently gotten his hair trimmed just the same. Malachi stood at 6'1" and weighed about 160 pounds. Malachi's eyes and hair were both dark brown and showed his Hispanic origin. Malachi too was appealing to most women and, like Ronnie, his extended teeth is all that ever raised question. "I'll let you know the second that I see them. Also," as Ronnie put his mouth close to his brother's ear, he whispered, "You and Nicole both look great today." In response, Malachi whispered back to Ronnie, "You look great today, little bro." At this they both smiled at each other before Malachi turned and then walked away. It was about 10 minutes later that David, Karina, and Mrs. Sanchez had shown up. As they walked into the main door of the church they found Ronnie leaning up against the wall watching them. "Where did you guys go? We're almost ready to start," Ronnie asked. "Well, we had to go get Malachi's and Nicole's wedding gift," David said as he smiled at his son. "Did you guys have to build it first?" With a grin on his face, Ronnie was just about to go track down Malachi when suddenly his dad tossed a set of keys at him. "No. We had to drive it here," David responded as he put his hand on Ronnie's shoulder. As Ronnie looked at the keys, he found H2 within the rubber finger grip. "A Hummer, Dad?" "Yep. Think that he'll like it?" "Oh my God, Dad. Malachi and Nicole are gonna love this so much." "What year is it?" Ronnie asked as he handed the keys back to his father. "A 2018. Brand new." Then, as he bent over to talk into Ronnie's ear, he continued, "Now don't tell Malachi or Nicole anything. No hints either. Okay, buddy?" "I won't. I promise, Dad. Now let's go. It's almost time to start the wedding." Just moments later, as everyone that was invited was seated, the organ began the tune to the wedding song. Simultaneously all, of about 100 people, went silent as Nicole, arm in arm, with Larry, began to slowly proceed towards the front of the chapel. As they made it about halfway to the front, Malachi stood up at the very front pew then turned to face Nicole. "You are the world's most beautiful women," Malachi thought to himself as her face glowed within her wedding gown. Behind Nicole, about 20 feet, was Ronnie as he carried a small white pillow with the wedding ring sitting on it. Eddie, along with the pastor, stood center at the front of the room as they watched Larry give Nicole away to Malachi. Nicole and Malachi then proceeded, together, up to the pastor and Eddie. As the four of them stood in silence, David and Karina also stood along with them. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pastor began, "we are here today to celebrate, with Malachi Declue and Nicole Malboff, the beginning of a new life, as they now choose to live the rest of their lives together as one. Malachi, do you promise to love and cherish Nicole, for the rest of your life, through sickness and health, till death do you part?" "Yes, I do," Malachi answered as he suddenly felt lightheaded. Nicole. Do you promise to love and cherish Malachi, for the rest of your life, through sickness and health, till death do you part? I do. Nicole's eyes began to water as the biggest moment of her life was happening right before her eyes. Does anyone within this chapel have any objections to the wedding at hand, between Malachi Declue and Nicole Malboff? For a moment, the pastor paused, as he searched the room for anyone that might object to the marriage. Well then, by the power granted within me, by the state of Colorado, I now pronounce you man and wife. Where's the rings? As Ronnie stood forward, between Malachi and Nicole, Malachi picked up Nicole's ring and then placed it on her left ring finger. Afterwards, Nicole picked up Malachi's ring, and then placed it on his left ring finger. Malachi, you may now kiss the bride. About halfway through the extended kiss, the entire chapel broke out into clapping and cheering. Someone, in the back of the chapel, had whistled loudly, creating another wave of cheers. Karina. We have a slight problem. Mrs. Sanchez whispered into her daughter's ear. What's that, Mom? The sun is now shining very brightly. The overcast is completely gone. The older woman said as she had just come in from helping Dave put a bow on the Hummer's windshield. At the same time that Mrs. Sanchez was saying this, Karina noticed, out of the corner of her eye, that Ronnie and Eddie were about to exit through a side door of the chapel. Ronnie and Eddie stopped. Karina thought as clear and as tempered that she could. Instantly, mid-step, Ronnie and Eddie both stopped and then held still. Seconds later they both turned to face Karina. Guys. The sun has come out very brightly. Get away from the door. Karina continued her thought. Hey Mom, Malachi said suddenly as he came up behind her. Malachi. Sorry to interrupt honey, but listen to me. You, Ronnie, and Eddie all need to stay in the church. The clouds have gone away and it's very bright outside. But what about the reception? Malachi asked as he looked at his watch. It was only 3:30, which meant that there was an hour left till the time that reception would begin. At their home, not at the church. I've got an idea. You three stay here and I'll go talk to your Grandma Sanchez. All right? Okay. Please hurry though. Hey Malachi. You cheer up. This is your wedding day and I swear that nothing is gonna get in your way. Understand? Karina asked and then turned to walk away after Malachi nodded his head. As Karina walked out of the chapel, heading for the main entrance, she found her mother just coming through the door. Hey Mom. Yeah honey? Marie asked as she grasped her daughter's hand. Do we have something that's dark in color that the boys could use to leave the building? That's a great idea. Yeah. I've got a few black tablecloths in the trunk of my car. We could easily make 3 capes out of them. As Karina listened to her mom's idea, her childhood images of a vampire reminded her that vampires do use capes. Coincidentally, black in color. Oh, great Mom. Now, I think that we need to get the Hummer back over to our house. We'll park it down by the garage, and then we'll have the boys go in through the front door. Mom, how about you get the guest to walk across the street to the house, to save on driveway space? I'll go tell Dave to take the Hummer over there and then I'll get the cloth out of your car and get this taken care of. All right honey. Mrs. Sanchez interrupted. Let's get this done with quickly. With that said, the older women went into the chapel and spoke to the guest. At about 4:15, all of the guests in the Hummer were all over to the Declue residence waiting on Eddie, Ronnie, Malachi, Nicole, and Karina. All right Ronnie. Try it now, Karina said, after she had shortened the length of the cape for the 5th time. Eddie's and Malachi's were fairly easy due to the fact that the tablecloth were already proper length. All that she had to do with Eddie's and Malachi's was shorten the width of the fabric. That's almost perfect Mom, Ronnie said as the cape was just a half-inch off of the floor. Karina's idea was to have the cape from the neck down to the soles of their shoes, and then the width long enough to stretch from one hand to the other as their arms were fully extended. This would be plenty of space to cover their heads and faces. Then, where the edge of the cape reached their hands, as they were extended, Karina put a strap on both sides for the kids' hands. This way there would be no mistake of forgetting, or slipping, when they needed to have their faces covered up. Alright Mom. Do you want us to walk across the street like this? Malachi asked as he inspected the straps, inside the cape, for his hands. Actually Malachi, no. Didn't you guys tell me that you were able to fly much faster than military fighter jets? Yeah. Eddie interrupted, at least 3 times the speed of a fighter jet. When we went after Eric Myers it took approximately 5 minutes to go from Craig to the west coast. I know that on, at least one of my passes, that it took about 7 minutes for a round trip from the west border of Colorado to the coast. As Nicole listened you could see her lower jaw seem to hit the floor as Eddie described the speeds of their movement. Well then you guys should be able to reach the front door of the house faster than a blink of an eye. Right? Karina asked as she rested her hands on her waist. So long as nothing is in the way. That shouldn't be a problem at all Mom, Malachi said as he looked out the window of the building towards the house across the street. In fact, call Grandma and tell her to open the screen door and block it open. Also, tell her to make sure that nobody is in the entrance area nor downstairs. Before Malachi had even finished his sentence Karina was dialing the number to her house, with her cell phone. About a minute later Karina stepped out the front door of the building. Hey Malachi. Eddie started with ESP. Let's show them a fast-moving trick. You grab Nicole and I'll grab your mom. We'll drop them off at the bottom of the basement steps. With a slight grin on Malachi's face he looked at Eddie. Okay. Let's do it. Be careful though. Out of the corner of his eye, Ronnie saw the exchange of facial expressions between Eddie and his brother. What's up guys? We're taking your mom and Nicole with us. They don't know it, Eddie said as he smiled back at Ronnie. Be very careful, Ronnie said with a very stern look on his face. Seconds later they saw Karina waving her hand indicating that the path was clear. Okay, let's go, Ronnie said as they all raised their arms to hide their faces behind the cape. As Karina began to wave her hand, she watched as Eddie pushed the door open. Suddenly Karina had a feeling like as if she was instantly pushed. The feeling had caused her to simultaneously blink her eyes, and then, as she opened her eyes she found herself standing, with Malachi, Nicole, Ronnie, and Eddie at the bottom of the downstairs steps of their house, facing the staircase, towards the front door that they had just entered. Looking over her shoulder, she looked at Eddie as he still had a tight grip on her. You guys just scared the shit out of me. Surprised to hear her daughter's voice, Mrs. Sanchez stepped down into the entryway and then looked down the stairs towards Karina and the kids. Karina and Nicole. Looks like, to me, that you two just hitched a quick ride. You boys better take those capes off and then put them in Eddie's bedroom. Then get up here to your guests. We'll be right up Grandma, Malachi said. Then, as he looked at his mom, he continued. But Mom. You can't say that you didn't enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. All that I did is blinked. I missed the part about the ride. Then, as she waved her hand, towards Eddie's room. You guys go ahead and put the capes away. Keep them though. We just may need them again sometime. About 5 minutes later Malachi, Ronnie, Eddie, and Nicole joined their friends and family upstairs. As they entered the kitchen Malachi found his father leaning up against the kitchen counter staring at him and his wife. Hey Malachi. Come here bud, he said as he pulled his hands out of his pockets. What's up Dad? Malachi asked as he stopped in front of his father. Then, reaching out towards his son, David wrapped both of his arms tightly around Malachi as he pulled him close to himself. You know Malachi. It seems like that you were born just yesterday, and then today you're a married man. As David held his son, Spud came running into the kitchen and jumped up, landing his front feet on David's legs. Crazy dog. It's hard to believe that he's still alive. Do you remember when we got Spud for you Malachi? No. Not really. I just remember him always being there. He's what? About 19 years old now. Yeah Dad. It's weird that he's still alive, Malachi said as he continued to relax within his dad's arms. I love you Dad. And thank you, for you guys putting this most perfect day together for Nicole and I. You're so welcome Malachi. David answered, as his own eyes began to water up, after all of the excitement. Looking up, As he continued to rest his chin on his son's shoulder, he saw Karina come into the kitchen holding the keys to the Hummer that Malachi nor Nicole had seen yet. "Hey buddy. I need you to turn around and look at something that your mom has in her hand." With this, David loosened his grip onto this son so that he could turn around. As Malachi focused his eyes on the object hanging off of his mom's finger, it took him a moment to realize exactly what it was that she was holding. "Keys," he said with an inquisitive sound in his voice. Then, as he focused his eyes on the detail of the keys, he saw H2 imprinted on them. "Oh my God," Malachi said as he reached out towards the keys, "you got us a. Oh my God, Mom and Dad. And Grandma Sanchez and Grandma and Grandpa Declue." His mom interrupted as she put the keys in his hand. Walking up to her husband's side, Nicole looked over his shoulder and saw the H2 instantly. "A Hummer," she said as her eyes got real wide. "We have a Hummer?" "Yep," Karina said with a smile on her face. "It's outside, by the garage." "Actually," David interrupted, "your mom Karina said that I should put in the garage. But first." As Karina pulled out some paperwork, there was a title in the name of Malachi Declue and Nicole Declue along with a proof of insurance. "License plate and insurance information with proof of insurance. You both need to sign some stuff here. Also, guys, the windows are tinted very dark." Though David wasn't so sure of the relevance of tinted windows, he agreed with Karina by nodding his head. "Even after you guys are done looking at your Hummer, we have something else that your mom and I would like to share with you." "Oh yeah. Nicole and Malachi are gonna love this. Sterling, come in here and see the inside," James said as he sat behind the wheel of the Hummer. Seconds later, Sterling's head appeared through the door panel of the passenger side of the large vehicle. "This is so cool, James. The banana yellow on the outside looks kinda odd, but yeah. They're gonna love this." Sterling agreed. "Where's Lloyd? He would love this too." "Lloyd's up in the kitchen. It's not very often that he sees his parents up close. Just leave him alone for now. After they leave he'll home around." "Hey James. Here's Nicole and Malachi, watch the look on their face," Sterling said as he got all the way inside the Hummer and then moved to the back seat. Seconds later, James also climbed into the back, just as Malachi opened the driver's side door. "Hey Nicole. Let's not go anywhere right now. Let's just start it and play a little. Then we'll go back upstairs to our guests." "Sounds like a plan to me." "I can't believe the size of this thing," Nicole said just as Malachi started the engine. Compared to what they were used to, the motor of the Hummer sounded like a tank. "Look at all of these buttons, gauges, and..." "Nicole, look in the glove box to see if there is a owner's manual. This may require some studying." "Well, which glove box?" Nicole asked as she realized that there was more than one compartment. Then, as she opened one compartment, on a centerpiece that separated the driver's side from the passenger's side, she found a book, with a full-colored picture of the vehicle, with the words Hummer 2 printed at the top, and owner's manual printed at the bottom of the picture. "Oh. Here it is," Nicole said just as Eddie entered the garage. "Wow." Eddie hollered. Then, just as Malachi turned off the engine, Eddie opened up the rear passenger's side door and then climbed in. "Guys. This is cool." "You bet it is," Malachi answered. Then, just as Eddie closed the door, Dave came out, into the garage, with a camcorder, Karina, Mrs. Sanchez, Patty, and Bill. "Hey guys. Pull it out of the garage so that we can get some video of you guys with it," David said loud enough to be heard through the closed door. Malachi, Nicole, and Eddie all looked at each other. "Why not?" Malachi said as he turned the key on again. With the start of the engine, Karina opened the garage door. "Sterling, get out fast," James hollered, then threw himself out through the closed back seat driver's side door, landing on the cement floor. About 2 seconds later, just before the wheels began to roll backwards, James saw Sterling's feet standing on the other side. "What's wrong, James? Why did we have to get out?" Sterling asked just as the Hummer rolled all the way outside. "Sterling, We cannot leave the perimeter of the house. No matter what. But, what if we do? What will happen? Sterling asked with an odd look of question in his face. We might cross over. The only time that we can leave the perimeter of the house is to greet someone, and to calm them down after they have died, and that's only if that someone lives in this house before they died. What do you mean to cross over? Crossing over is when you either go to heaven or to hell. And, once you cross over, you can't come back. Never? Sterling asked. Never. It was almost 7 o'clock when some of the people had began to leave the reception. Sitting on the couch, next to his mother, Lloyd just listened to the adult conversation between his mother and Mrs. Alberts as they discussed Malachi's life with patched in areas of James's life and his own prior to death. Since the incident of James attempting to touch a toy during the last séance, Lloyd had spent countless hours wondering what it would feel like to touch his mom's or his father's hand. With this thought, once again crossing his mind, he watched his mother's hand as it rested on her lap. Daring himself to touch it, he reached out towards her hand and then stopped about an inch away. Closing his eyes, Lloyd then continued to move his hand forward in hopes of feeling something, anything but at least. Nearly jumping off of the couch, Mrs. Bruce swung her arm around herself. Mrs. Alberts. Something just touched my hand. Mrs. Bruce said loudly. Something very cold just touched me. Well, I don't know what it could have been. There is nothing close to you. Mrs. Alberts said as she looked up towards the ceiling for a possible water leak that may have dripped on her. That was weird. Mrs. Bruce continued. It wasn't the feeling of something just falling, a cold chill, or anything like that. Something actually felt as though it deliberately touched me. Lloyd was instantly excited as his mother's reaction. To himself, he actually did feel the warmth and physical presence of her hand. Yet, as he had tried to touch her again, immediately afterwards, his hand had just passed right through her. Why won't it work again? Lloyd asked himself. Come on. Work. He told himself as he began to get upset. Then, just as his mom had stood up, Lloyd had, once again, closed his eyes and then slowly reached out towards her as he imagined the physical touch. This time, however, he decided to grab a hold of her rather than just touching. Then, as he slowly extended his arm, he once again felt the skin tissues within his hand as he closed his fingers tightly and then continued to hold. With his eyes closed. Oh my God! Look! Mrs. Bruce shouted as she pointed at her arm with the index finger of her opposite arm. Mrs. Alberts stared to where she pointed and could see an impression on the center of her right lower arm, where something was obviously squeezing the soft tissues. Oh my! What's happening? Mrs. Alberts asked as she covered her mouth with her hands. Looking very closely at the impression on her arm, Mrs. Bruce could almost swear that she could see where individual fingers and a palm were tightly gripped around her arm. As she continued to hold still and stare, she quietly covered her mouth with her other hand, as others within the room seemed to not notice what was happening. Slowly opening his eyes, Lloyd realized that he still had contact with his mother as she stared at his hand in awe. Lloyd had almost broke into tears with a combination of feelings flashing through his mind. He was happy that he was making the physical contact with her, yet at the same time he was wishing for a whole lot more. Like the ability to talk with his mom. Eddie. I've got to get a message to Eddie. As this thought came to his mind, he decided to let go of his mother's arm. Leaving the living room, Lloyd went downstairs and then into the garage where he knew that Eddie had followed close behind Malachi and Nicole. As Lloyd entered the garage, all that he could see was James and Sterling as they were staring out the garage door. As he approached them, he could see that they were staring at the Hummer with Malachi, Nicole, and Eddie inside of it. On the outside of the vehicle was David, with a camera, and Karina, Marie, Bill, and Patty. What's going on, guys? Lloyd asked. Dave's just getting pictures of Malachi, Nicole, and Eddie inside of the Hummer, James said as he turned to face his friend. I'm surprised that you're not upstairs with your parents. I was. Something has come up though, Lloyd said as he continued to stare out the garage door. Come up? What do you mean? I just touched my mom and then I grabbed a hold of her arm. Lloyd continued. You mean that you tried to touch her, right? James asked as he turned completely around to face Lloyd. No. Lloyd said as he looked at James, I grabbed her arm. She felt it. Your mom saw the indentions on my mom's arm. Both of them freaked out. I'm freaking out. I want my mom to be involved in a seance, James. As Lloyd looked back out the garage door, he continued, somehow I need to get a message to Eddie. How do you plan to do that? Sterling asked. I don't know. All that I can do is just follow Eddie around and hope that an idea comes to mind. Hopefully my parents will still be here. Then, as Lloyd looked back towards Sterling and James, he changed the subject. How do they like the Hummer? Oh. They love it. There's just a lot of confusion with all of the gadgets on the dash and center console. They are gonna have to study the owner's manual very carefully. It stopped. Mrs. Bruce said. I know, I can see that your arm is back to normal. I wonder what's going on. Mrs. Alberts asked. Mrs. Bruce wanted to say what she thought that it might be Lloyd. Knowing, however, that Mrs. Albert's son had also died in the Decluse home, she decided to keep the thought to herself to avoid causing Mrs. Albert's hopes to get too high. Instead, she decided that she would try to visit the Decluse more often in hopes that one day that her own hopes would be confirmed. I'm not sure what's going on. I'm just as curious as you are, she answered as she tried to hide the smile that was coming over her face. Deciding to put the Hummer back into the garage until later, they carefully, and slowly, pulled the high-rised vehicle back and out of the sun. Thank you guys so much, Malachi said loudly as he opened the door. You guys are welcome. Mrs. Sanchez spoke up. Just be very careful with it. It was very expensive. Yes it was, Bill said as he helped his daughter-in-law out the door, but you guys also should have some fun with it too. Then, moments later, everyone headed upstairs into the kitchen. Once everyone was in the kitchen, Karina, once again, pulled out a set of keys out of her pocket and held them in her hand in front of Malachi, Nicole, Eddie, and Ronnie, as he too came into the kitchen. Where have you been, Ronnie? Malachi asked as he stood beside his brother. In the bathroom, he answered as he looked at the keys in his mom's hand. What are those keys to, Mom? Actually, these keys belong to your father and I. To our apartment at the Ridgeview Apartments. Pausing for a moment, she continued as she saw the kids' eyes bulge out. As your last big gift from your dad and I, guys. Ronnie and Eddie. You guys too. Your dad and I are moving out and leaving the house to all of you guys. Not to trash it, but to continue living here, and then your dad and I can have more quiet time together. Pausing, Karina almost felt like she had scared the kids due to their sudden and constant silence. It's gonna be alright, guys. We're only gonna be a phone call away. Well. Eddie broke the silence. Maybe Nicole and Malachi can move into your room and then I can move upstairs. That's good thinking, David agreed. Eddie, you could have moved into my room if I had known that you wanted to be up here, Ronnie said. And I thank you very much, Ronnie. I wouldn't want to crowd you though, you need space too. As usual, Eddie had always put others ahead of himself. Yeah. Then that room would be big enough for a baby crib too later on. Malachi finally said for the first time since his mother brought the subject up. When are you guys talking about moving out? Within the next week. We need to do it before the snow gets here for the season. You know that Halloween seems to always be the first day of snow and today is the 9th of October, David said. Well. Since today is our wedding day, and my birthday, I personally elect that we don't do it today, Nicole said with a smile on her face. Well, of course not, hun, Karina said. We'll start this weekend. Who knows, maybe we will be able to finish in just a few loads. You've got to remember that the apartments are fairly small. We can't take too much and we'll probably use Sterling's furniture rather than what we have in the house. That way everyone will still be living comfortably. Come on guys. David said loudly. Think of this as a good thing. If we didn't trust you guys, or if we felt that you were not capable of being responsible enough of taking care of this house, Ronnie, or yourselves, we wouldn't do it. But we do trust you guys and we know that you can do it. Malachi, Nicole, Eddie and Ronnie. You guys will be alright. David pushed. Okay. Snap out of it guys. Mrs. Sanchez said as she loudly snapped her hands together. Go and intermingle before people get bored and leave. At this, Eddie decided that it was time for him to go to the bathroom as Ronnie, Malachi, and Nicole went into the living room. Only being in the bathroom to urinate, within a couple minutes he was standing in front of the bathroom sink washing his hands. To get the shock of the recent news out of his mind, Eddie decided to wash his face in some hot water as he grabbed a washcloth out of the cupboard below the sink. After holding the clean cloth under the water stream for a good minute or so, he let the hot rag remain on his face for about 3 minutes, as the faucet continued to run. Suddenly, Eddie heard a squeaking sound coming from the medicine cabinet in front of him. As he uncovered his face quickly to see the source of the sound, Eddie saw an image being drawn, through the steam, on the glass mirror, that read "Do a Seance." ASAP at the bottom, it was signed LB. Walking out of the bathroom, Eddie headed down the hall and then down the stairs as he began to send a message, to Ronnie, through ESP. Ronnie. I need you to come downstairs right now. Don't tell anyone. Just come down to my room. Then, before Eddie finished his descent down the second flight of stairs, he heard Ronnie heading down the steps up above him. Just as Eddie walked into his room, he grabbed his duffel bag out of his closet and then began to pull candles out of the bag just as Ronnie entered the room. What's going on, Eddie? Honestly, I don't know. What I do know, however, is that after I just got done taking a piss upstairs, Lloyd wrote a message, in the steamed mirror, for us to do a seance right now. Bending down to the floor, with Eddie, Ronnie began to help him set up the candles and string. I wonder what this is all about. Ronnie said as he pushed in the final thumbtack. I don't know. It's urgent though, Eddie said as he quickly sat down. Okay Ronnie. Find your seat. Pausing for about 30 seconds, Eddie began to speak. Lloyd. This is Eddie. Ronnie and I are both he. Hey Eddie. Thanks for contacting me as quick as you have. Hello Ronnie. Hi Lloyd. Ronnie responded. Eddie. I touched my mom earlier on the arm. You mean that you tried to? Right? No. I just had this same conversation with James too. I did touch her Eddie. If you ask her I can tell you that she'll say yes I did. Pausing for a moment he re-continued. Eddie. Or Ronnie, I want one of you two to bring my mom down here right now. Don't tell her why. Don't allow anyone else to come. Ronnie. Lloyd said as he stared him directly in the face, please go get her. Without another word, Ronnie stood up then left the room. Lloyd. What's happening? And why did you scare me like that in the bathroom? Won't ESP work with you guys? Eddie. Slow down man. A little while ago, while you guys were out in the Hummer I was in the living room with your wedding guests. Do you remember James trying to touch that Power Rangers figure? Yeah. What about it? Well, while I was in the living room, I tried to touch my mom and it worked. She felt it, I felt it, and James' mother saw it. I've got to talk to her. Eddie, I've got to. Understand? Yeah. I understand Lloyd. Just be careful of the choices that you make with the seances. If everyone finds out that we regularly talk to the dead in our home, they will put us into some padded room or something. I understand Eddie. And thank you. Hey Lloyd, you're my friend. Suddenly the door handle turned as Ronnie and Mrs. Bruce walked into the room. What's going on guys? She asked and then suddenly made eye contact with her. Son? Oh my lord. She started as she leaned up against Ronnie for support. Mom. It's alright. That was me touching you upstairs. I know it was Lloyd. Mrs. Bruce said as she began to cry, I know it was you after you grabbed my arm. Baby. I miss you so much. I miss you too, Mom. I spend time with you every time that you visit the Declues. Today was the first time that I tried to touch you though. And I enjoyed it, Lloyd. Oh, I miss you so much. Mom. Listen to me. We can't tell anyone about this. Not even Dad. Do you understand me? Yeah. Whatever you say, honey. I promise that I won't tell anyone. I promise. Mrs. Bruce. If you hold true on that promise, you can talk to Lloyd when I do our seances here in our home. We can't do it in your home because Lloyd can't leave our house. Eddie explained. Continue to talk to him for a while right now, then, in the future we will call and invite you over here again. All right. Thank you, Eddie. I really do appreciate it, she said as she continued to stare at her son. Lloyd. Your dad and I have missed you so much. Walking up next to Eddie, she crept down to one knee as she reached out towards Lloyd. I wish so much that I could hold you, Lloyd. Mrs. Bruce started to quietly cry as her hand passed right through Lloyd's image. It was about 8 o'clock that Mr. Bruce had began to ask about his wife. Then, just as he asked David if she had left, Mrs. Bruce walked into the kitchen full of smiles. Are you all right? He asked her. Yeah. I'm doing perfect, honey, she said as she looked at Malachi. Hey Malachi and Nicole. Congratulations on your wedding. You guys looked great today. Well, thank you, Mrs. Bruce. Malachi and Nicole both said at the same time. And thank you for being here with us today. We really appreciated your presence today. Oh. But not as much as I did. Mrs. Bruce said. Soon everyone was gone except for those that lives in the house. There was nothing said about Lloyd's and his mother's experience. There was no questions about why Mrs. Bruce was downstairs. All that anyone knew was the events surrounding the wedding and the reception. The following Friday, as Dave got off of work, they loaded up Sterling's furniture and clothes, that were David's and Corina's, into David's truck and then moved all the items, that were to be moved, within just 3 loads. Then, as that night rolled around, David and Corina left the house keys for Malachi, Ronnie, and Eddie. Gee, Eddie said, to break the silence, after David and Corina had walked out the door. Not only did it seem to quieten the house, but also a certain level of loneliness throughout the entire house. It's weird. Both of your parents have been out of the house at the same time before, like when they were both working, but now. I don't know how to explain the feeling within this house. Except to say lonely. I'm sure that it's just gonna take a few days to get used to it, Nicole said. In fact, I think, to help this weird feeling to heal a little faster, that perhaps Malachi and I should hurry and move into the master bedroom right now. While we're doing that, you, Eddie, could start moving your stuff up here right now. Good idea, Eddie said as he seemed to instantly turn to head down the stairs. Eddie. Malachi called, from the top of the steps, before Eddie had even finished walking down the first flight of steps. Go ahead and put your stuff in the hallway, next to Ronnie's bedroom door. That way we can all stay busy right now. Sounds good to me. Eddie responded and then looked at Ronnie. Would you like to help me, bud? Sure, Ronnie said as he immediately began to jog down the first flight of steps, then, intentionally flew down the next set as he landed in the basement.